The massive space station floated silently in the darkness between stars. It was called the Sara Prime, and it served as the meeting place for the Galactic Council. For 12,000 years, alien species from across the galaxy had gathered here to make laws, settle disputes, and maintain peace among the stars. The station was enormous, built from metals that shimmered with colors humans had no names for. Its corridors stretched for miles. Millions of beings walked through them every day. Admiral Catherine Morrison stood in the central tribunal chamber. She was 52 years old, with gray streaks in her brown hair and lines around her eyes that spoke of decades spent making impossible decisions. Her dress uniform was perfectly pressed, every medal and ribbon in its proper place. She had not slept properly in 3 days, but no one looking at her would know it. She had learned long ago to hide her exhaustion. Beside her stood General Linda Vasquez. Linda was younger, 45, with dark skin and close-cropped black hair. She had grown up in the slums of Mexico City before earning her way into the military academy. Through sheer determination and brilliance, her hands were clasped behind her back. But Catherine could see the tension in her shoulders. On Catherine's other side was Vice Admiral Patricia O'Brien. Everyone called her Patty. She was the oldest of the three at 58, with bright red hair that was slowly turning white and a face full of freckles that made her look deceptively friendly. She had commanded the 3rd Fleet for 15 years and had never lost a major. Engagement. These 3 women were among the most decorated officers in the history of the United Earth military. Together, they had planned and executed the liberation of Kepler-44 to be a human colony world that had been invaded and occupied by an alien empire called the Rithani Dominion. Now they stood in chains, accused of war crimes. The tribunal chamber was circular, with seats rising in tiers all around them. Representatives from 47 different species filled those seats. Catherine could see the insect-like Cathari, with their clicking mandibles and compound eyes. She could see the Velmori beings made of living gas contained within floating spheres. She could see dozens of other species, some beautiful, some terrifying. All of them watching the 3 human women with expressions that ranged from curiosity to contempt. High above them, on an elevated platform, sat the senior members of the council. The most important among them was High Arbiter Zathan. He was a Thessaran, a species that resembled tall, elegant reptiles. His scales shifted color as he moved, going from deep purple to midnight blue. His eyes were golden and ancient, and when he spoke, his voice carried a strange musical quality. "You stand accused of crimes against galactic peace," Zathan announced. His voice echoed through the chamber. "The charges are as follows. First, the use of excessive military force. Second, the destabilization of a sovereign region. Third, conduct unbecoming of representatives of a council member species." Catherine said nothing. Her attorney, a young human man named Christopher Lane, had told her to stay quiet until the formal charges were complete. Christopher was brilliant, one of the best legal minds humanity had produced. But Catherine could see the worry in his eyes. He knew, as she did, that this trial was not about justice. During the engagement at Kepler-44b, Zathan continued, "Forces under your command destroyed 17 military installations, disabled 300 Rithani warships, and caused the deaths of 42,000 Rithani soldiers. The Council finds these actions to be disproportionate to the situation." Linda Vasquez spoke before anyone could stop her. The situation was 8 million human colonists being enslaved. A murmur rippled through the chamber. The Cathari representative clicked rapidly, a sound that might have been surprise or disapproval. Several other species shifted in their seats. Ambassador Krethvalum rose from his position among the accusers. He was Rithani, with gray, leathery skin stretched tight over a skull that seemed too large for his body. His teeth were like needles, and his eyes were small and black and full of hatred. He pointed one clawed finger at the 3 women. "Those colonists were illegal settlers," he hissed. "They invaded sovereign Dominion territory. We had every right to remove them." "They were refugees," Patty O'Brien said. Her voice was calm, but there was ice beneath it. "They were running from the Cascade collapse. They settled on an empty world that your Dominion claimed on a map, but never visited in 200 years. Zathan raised one clawed hand. Silence. The circumstances of the human settlement are not the subject of this tribunal. What is on trial today is the conduct of these 3 officers. Catherine understood now what this was really about. Humanity had joined the Galactic Council 40 years ago, shortly after making first contact with alien life. They had been the newcomers. The young species trying to find their place among civilizations that were thousands of years old. They had been tolerated, sometimes helped, often ignored. But then the Rathani had invaded Kepler-442b. The Council had done nothing. They had debated and discussed, and formed committees, while 8 million humans suffered. So humanity had acted on its own. 3 human generals had done in 6 weeks what the Council's peacekeeping forces had failed to do in centuries. They had defeated the Rathani Dominion so completely that the Empire would need decades to recover. They had freed every single human prisoner. They had shown the galaxy that humanity was not to be underestimated, and that terrified the Council. Catherine looked up at Zathan and saw it in his eyes. Fear, the High Arbiter, leader of the most powerful political body in the galaxy, was afraid of 3 human women. Tribunal will recess for 6 hours, Zathan announced. When we return, we will hear detailed testimony regarding the specific actions of each accused officer. The chamber began to empty. Guards in council uniforms moved forward to escort Catherine and the others to holding cells. As they walked, Catherine passed Earth's ambassador, Gregory Sullivan. He was an older man with white hair and kind eyes. Right now, those eyes were filled with helpless anger. Catherine leaned close to him as she passed. "Tell them about this," she whispered. "Tell everyone." Gregory nodded once, his jaw tight, as she was led away. Catherine caught a glimpse of Ambassador Krethvel speaking quietly with the Velmori representative. Whatever they were planning, it would not be good for humanity. But Catherine was not worried about herself. She was worried about what would happen next. Humanity. It spent 40 years trying to be good members of the galactic community. They had followed the rules. They had been patient and diplomatic. They had bent over backward to prove they belonged. And this was how the Council repaid them. Catherine Morrison had served in the military for 30 years. She had seen combat on a dozen worlds. She had lost friends and soldiers, and sometimes pieces of herself. But she had never felt so certain of one thing. The galaxy had made a terrible mistake. And sooner or later, it would understand just how terrible that mistake was. The testimonies lasted for days. For long, exhausting days of lies and half-truths and carefully edited recordings designed to make Catherine Morrison, Linda Vasquez, Patty O'Brien look like monsters. The Council brought forward Rathani survivors who spoke of human brutality. They showed footage of destroyed ships and burning bases. They displayed images of Rathani soldiers lying dead in the streets of cities they had occupied. They painted a picture of 3 bloodthirsty human generals who had ignored every chance for peaceful resolution and chosen violence instead. What they did not show was the other footage. The footage from the human side. They did not show the mass graves that Linda Vasquez's Marines had discovered in the hills outside the colony's main city. Graves filled with thousands of human bodies, men and women and children who had been executed for resisting the occupation. They did not show the breeding camps where human women were held and used to produce more slaves for the Dominion's outer territories. They did not show the children who had been separated from their parents and sold to traders from the Outer Rim. They did not show any of that because it did not fit the story they wanted to tell. Catherine sat in her seat and listened and said nothing. Her attorney, Christopher Lane, objected when he could. He tried to introduce the human evidence, the recordings and testimonies that showed what the Rathani had really done on Kepler-442b, but the Council rejected every attempt. Procedural issues, they said. Improper documentation. Lack of verified chain of custody. It was all nonsense and everyone knew it. But the rules were the rules, and the Council controlled the rules. On the 4th day, a Rathani general named Vorthkai took the stand. He was tall for his species, nearly 7 feet, with scars covering half his face from some long-ago battle. He spoke in a cold, steady voice, about the day human forces had attacked his command base. "We were prepared to negotiate," Vorthkai said. "We had received word that the humans wished to discuss terms. We lowered our shields as a gesture of good faith, and then their ships opened fire." Catherine's hands tightened in her lap. It was a lie. A complete and total lie. There had been no offer to negotiate. Vorthkai's base had been actively executing human prisoners when the attack began. Linda's intelligence team had intercepted the orders. They had the recordings, but those recordings would never be played in this chamber. Christ, stop. Her rose to cross-examine, but Vorthkai had been well prepared. He had answers for everything. Smooth. Reasonable answers that made him sound like a victim and humanity sound like aggressors. When the testimonies finally ended, the council took 2 hours to deliberate. 2 hours to decide the fate of 3 women who had done nothing but protect their own people. Catherine spent those 2 hours in a holding cell with Linda and Patty. They did not speak much. There was nothing to say. They all knew what was coming. The guards came for them at sunset, though sunset meant nothing on a space station. They were led back into the tribunal chamber, which was once again filled with representatives from across the galaxy. Catherine looked at their faces and saw no sympathy, only cold judgment. High Arbiter Zothan stood at his elevated platform. His scales were darker now, almost black, which Catherine had learned was a sign of formal solemnity among his species. "The council has reached its verdict," he announced. "On the charge of excessive military force, we find the accused guilty." A murmur went through the crowd. Christopher Lane was on his feet, but a gesture from the guards made him sit back down. "On the charge of destabilizing regional peace, we find the accused guilty. On the charge of conduct unbecoming representatives of a council member species, we find the accused guilty." Catherine stood perfectly still. She would not give them the satisfaction of seeing her react. "The sentence is as follows," Zothan continued. "Admiral Catherine Morrison, General Linda Vasquez, and Vice Admiral Patricia O'Brien are hereby stripped of their military ranks and honors. They are permanently exiled from all council-controlled space. All pensions and benefits are forfeit." There was more. Catherine knew there would be more. Additionally, to ensure that humanity understands the gravity of its transgressions, these 3 individuals will serve a period of rehabilitation at the corrections facility on Tarthos 7. The duration of this rehabilitation will be determined by the facility administrators based on the progress of each individual. The chamber erupted. Christopher was shouting about violations of protocol. Human representatives were on their feet, demanding to be heard. Gregory Sullivan looked like he might physically attack the High Arbiter, but the gavel fell, and the noise died away. The sentence stood, Tarthos 7. Catherine had heard of it, though the council officially denied its existence. It was not a rehabilitation facility. It was a place where the powerful sent those they wanted to disappear. Those who emerged from Tarthos 7, if they emerged at all, were never the same. The guards moved forward. As they attached new restraints to Catherine's wrists, she looked up at Zothan. Their eyes met, and she saw something that surprised her. Fear. The High Arbiter was afraid. Not of her, not exactly, but of what she represented, of what humanity represented. 3 human women had defeated an empire that had terrorized this region of space for centuries. If 3 could do that, what could 3 billion do? What could 30 billion do? The council was not punishing Catherine for what she had done. They were trying to send a message about what humanity must never do again. As she was led from the chamber, Catherine passed close to Ambassador Gregory Sullivan. His face was gray with shock and helpless rage. She leaned close and whispered, "Tell them. Tell everyone back home what happened here." Gregory nodded, his eyes wet with tears he was too proud to shed. The guards pushed Catherine forward, and she walked out of the tribunal chamber with her head held high. Beside her, Linda and Patty did the same. They were soldiers. They would face whatever came with dignity. But deep inside, Catherine felt something new. Not fear, not despair, something harder and colder. Hope, because she knew her people. She knew what humanity did when its own were threatened. The council thought they were sending a message by condemning 3. Generals, they had no idea what message they were about to receive in return. The news reached Earth in 7 hours. It traveled through hyperspace communication relays, bouncing from station to station across hundreds of light years until it arrived at the receiving arrays orbiting humanity's homeworld. From there, it spread like wildfire. Every news network, every social media platform, every communication channel humanity had built carried the same story. 3 of Earth's greatest heroes had been convicted of war crimes. 3 women who had saved 8 million lives were being sent to a torture facility hidden in the depths of space. The Galactic Council, the organization that humanity had trusted and respected for 40 years, had betrayed them. The response was immediate and overwhelming. In New Shanghai, the largest city on Earth, protesters filled Liberation Square within hours. They came by the hundreds of thousands, carrying signs and chanting and demanding justice. Police tried to maintain order, but there was no violence. The crowd was angry, yes, but their anger was directed at the stars, not at each other. In Lagos, the capital of the African Union, the parliament held an emergency session that lasted through the night. Representatives from 52 nations shouted and argued, and eventually voted unanimously to condemn the council's actions. It was the fastest unanimous vote in the Parliament's history, in the orbital habitats of the asteroid belt. Miners stopped their work and gathered around screens showing footage from the tribunal. These were tough men and women who spent their lives carving resources from rocks floating in the void. They did not cry easily, but many of them cried that night, in cities and towns across 100 colony worlds. Humans looked up at the sky and felt something they had not felt in a long time: unity. Whatever differences they had among themselves, whatever political disagreements or cultural conflicts, they were all human. And humanity had been wronged. But the real response began in a quiet office in Geneva. Secretary General Dorothy Coleman sat at her desk, watching the replay of the sentencing for the 12th time. She was 73 years old, with white hair and dark skin, and eyes that had seen more than most people could imagine. She had survived the Cascade collapse, when Earth's sun had begun to die and humanity had been forced to flee to the stars. She had been there for first contact when humans learned they were not alone in the universe. She had led her people through the unification, wars that had finally brought all of humanity under one government. She had earned her position through decades of service and sacrifice, and now she faced a decision that would determine the future of her species. On the screen, High Arbiter Zathan pronounced the sentence again. Dorothy watched Catherine Morrison's face, calm, controlled, unbroken. That was good. Catherine was strong. She would need to be strong for what was coming. Dorothy pressed a button on her desk. "Samuel," she said, "get me Admiral Richardson, and pull the file on Protocol Yaga." Your aide, Samuel Turner, appeared in the doorway. He was young, barely 30, but he had worked for Dorothy long enough to know when she was serious. "Ma'am, Protocol Yaga requires unanimous approval from the Security Council, then call an emergency session."
"Oh?"
Dorothy's voice was steady. "They have 1 hour." Samuel hesitated for just a moment. Then he nodded and disappeared. 40-7 minutes later, the approval came through. Every single member of the Security Council had voted yes. Some of them had been crying when they cast their votes. Others had been too angry for tears, but all of them understood what was at stake. Protocol Yaga was one of humanity's most closely guarded secrets. It was not a weapon, not a fleet, not a military strategy. It was something far more dangerous. It was a person. Admiral John Richardson appeared on Dorothy's screen. He was a big man, broad-shouldered and gray-haired, with the kind of face that inspired confidence. Right now, that face was troubled. "Madam Secretary," he said, "I have to advise against this. Marcus Cole has been in stasis for 15 years. There's no guarantee he'll cooperate. He never really followed orders even when he was active." "I'm not asking him to follow orders," Dorothy said. "I'm asking him to be himself." Richardson was quiet for a long moment. Dorothy knew he was thinking about the last time Marcus Cole had been awake. The things he had done during the Syndicate War. Necessary things. Terrible things. things that still haunted the dreams of soldiers who had served with him. "I'll begin the revival process," Richardson finally said. "He should be conscious within 6 hours. Make it 4. Richardson opened his mouth to protest, then closed it. He knew better than to argue with Dorothy Coleman when she had that look in her eyes. "Yes, ma'am." The screen went dark. Dorothy leaned back in her chair and closed her eyes. For 40 years, humanity had tried to be good citizens of the galaxy. They had followed the Council's rules. They had been patient when patience was difficult and diplomatic when diplomacy seemed pointless. They had bent over backward to prove they were civilized, reasonable, worthy of respect, and the Council had responded by kidnapping 3 of their daughters, planning to torture them. Enough humanity had other ways of handling problems, older ways. Ways that came from the time before they reached the stars, when survival meant being harder and more ruthless than anything that threatened you. The galaxy thought humans were soft. They thought 40 years of peace had made humanity weak. They were about to learn how wrong they were. Dorothy opened her eyes and looked at a photograph on her desk. It showed a U and G woman in a military uniform, smiling at the camera. Her granddaughter, who served on Catherine Morrison's staff, who had been at Kepler 4 for 2B, and had helped free those 8 million people. "Hang on," Dorothy whispered to the photograph. "Help is coming, somewhere deep beneath the Nevada desert." In a facility that officially did not exist, a cryogenic pod began the process of waking its occupant. The Baba Yaga was coming back. The facility had no name on any official document. It existed 2 miles beneath the Nevada desert, carved into rock that had been there for hundreds of millions of years. The people who worked there did not talk about their jobs. Their families did not know where they went every day. As far as the rest of humanity was concerned, this place did not exist. In the center of the facility, in a room that was always kept at exactly -196 degrees, there was a single cryogenic pod. It was black and sleek, covered with monitors and tubes and blinking lights that tracked the vital signs of the person inside. Dr. Maria Santos led the medical team that had been called in to perform the revival. She was 50 years old, one of the best cryogenic specialists in human space. And her hands had not stopped shaking since she received the call. "Begin warming sequence," she ordered. The technicians around her moved quickly, adjusting controls and monitoring readouts. The temperature in the pod began to rise. The ice crystals that had preserved the occupant's cells for 15 years began to melt. Drugs flowed through tubes into the body, stimulating heart function and brain activity. Maria watched the monitors carefully. Heart rate was increasing. Brain waves were showing signs of activity. Everything was proceeding exactly as it should, but she could not stop thinking about who was in that pod. Everyone in the military had heard stories about Marcus Cole. Most people thought they were exaggerations, the kind of legends that soldiers told around campfires to scare each other. Maria had thought so too, till she received this assignment 5 years ago and read the classified files. The stories were not exaggerations. If anything, they understated the truth. Marcus Cole had been born in a small town in Montana 60 years ago. His childhood had been unremarkable. He had joined the military at 18, served in several minor conflicts, and been noticed by his superiors for his unusual combination of intelligence and ruthlessness. He was recruited into special operations at 25. That was when the real records began. Marcus Cole had been everywhere humanity had fought. He had operated behind enemy lines during the border wars. He had assassinated 3 warlords during the colonial rebellion. He had single-handedly destroyed a pirate fleet that had been terrorizing the outer colonies for years, but it was during the Syndicate War that he had earned his reputation. The Syndicate had been a criminal organization that had grown powerful enough to threaten entire planetary governments. They had thousands of soldiers, hundreds of ships, and connections throughout human space. The regular military had been unable to stop them, so they sent Marcus Cole in 18 months. He dismantled the entire organization. Not through battles or sieges, but through fear. He appeared where he should not have been able to appear. He killed people who should have been untouchable. He left messages written in blood and terror that made hardened criminals abandon their posts and flee by the end. The Syndicate's own soldiers were more afraid of Marcus Cole than they were of any enemy fleet. They called him names in a dozen languages. The Ghost, the Shadow, the End. But humanity had a different name for him, one drawn from old Earth stories, from tales of a supernatural being who came for those who harmed the innocent, a figure who could not be stopped, could not be reasoned with, who would pursue its target to the ends of the universe. They called him the Baba Yaga. The monitors beeped. Maria watched as Marcus Cole's eyes opened for the first time in 15 years. They were pale gray, almost colorless, like fog over a frozen lake. They moved slowly, taking in the room, the medical team, the banks of equipment. There was no confusion in those eyes, no disorientation, just cold, patient assessment. What year is it? His voice was rough from disuse, but steady. 2347, sir, Maria managed to say. You've been in stasis for 15 years? Marcus sat up slowly. His joints cracked and popped, but he did not seem to notice. He was not a large man, maybe 5'10" and 170 pounds, with short brown hair that was starting to gray at the temples. He did not look dangerous. He looked like someone's father, someone's neighbor, someone you would pass on the street without a second glance. That Maria knew was what made him so effective. Admiral Richardson stepped forward from the shadows at the edge of the room. Mr. Cole, thank you for your service. Marcus looked at him. Why am I awake? Richardson swallowed. Maria saw sweat on his forehead despite the cold. 3 of our generals have been convicted by the Galactic Council. Admiral Catherine Morrison, General Linda Vasquez, Vice Admiral Patricia O'Brien. They're being transported to Tarthos 7. Something flickered in Marcus's pale eyes. Just for a moment. I trained Morrison. 20 years ago, when she was a lieutenant. She was good. She still is. Tarthos 7. Marcus swung his legs off the table and stood. He moved like a much younger man, smooth and controlled, every motion efficient. The Council's black site. The place they pretend doesn't exist. Yes. Marcus was quiet for a moment. When he spoke again, his voice was soft. How long until they arrive? 72 hours. And my parameters. This was the question Richardson had been dreading. The Secretary General was specific. There are no parameters. Whatever you need to do, whatever resources you require, whoever you need to go through. Your only objective is to bring our people home. Marcus looked at him, and then he smiled. It was not a pleasant smile. It was the smile of something old and dangerous that had been woken from a long sleep and was very, very hungry. I need a ship, Marcus said. Fast and quiet. A crew that knows how to follow orders without asking questions. And I need the location of every council member who voted for this conviction. You'll have it within the hour. Marcus walked toward the door, then paused. He turned back to look at Maria, who had not moved since he woke up. Doctor, he said, thank you for your care. Then he was gone, walking down the corridor toward whatever dark purpose awaited him. Maria stood in the cold room, surrounded by the equipment that had kept a monster asleep for 15 years. The Baba Yaga was awake, and the galaxy would remember why they should never have touched. Humanity's own, the prison. Transport was called the Vessel of Justice. It was a Thessaran ship designed to carry dangerous criminals to facilities throughout Council space. Its hull was reinforced with 3 feet of armor. Its engines could outrun most military vessels. Its security systems were considered the most advanced in the galaxy, Catherine. Morrison sat in her cell and listened to the hum of those engines. They had been traveling for 69 hours. According to her guards, they would reach Tarthos the 7th in another 3 hours. After that, she did not know what would happen to her. Linda Vasquez was in the cell next to hers. Patty O'Brien was on the other side. They could not see each other, but they could hear each other's breathing. None of them had spoken much during the journey. There was nothing to say. The guards were a mixed group, the Sarans and Rathani working together. They took their duties seriously. Every 4 hours, they brought food and water. Every 8 hours, They allowed the prisoners 10 minutes of exercise in a small chamber near their cells. They were professional and efficient and completely confident in the security of their ship. That confidence lasted until the power went out. It happened suddenly, without warning. One moment the lights were on, and the engines were humming, and everything was normal. The next moment, complete darkness. Complete silence. Emergency lighting flickered on, bathing everything in dim red. The guards immediately went for their weapons. Catherine could hear them shouting to each other in their own languages, trying to figure out what had happened. Then the screaming started. It came from the forward compartment first. Two voices, the sound by the sound of them, crying out in terror before being cut off. Then silence. Then screaming from the engine room. Then from the guard stations. One by one, sounds of violence moved through the ship like a wave. Catherine pressed herself against the bars of her cell, trying to see into the corridor. The emergency lights cast long shadows, and in those shadows, something was moving. Something fast. Something silent. A Rathani guard ran past her cell, his eyes wide with fear. He did not get far. A hand reached out of the darkness and grabbed him by the throat. There was a wet sound, and then the guard was falling, and the shadow was moving on. The screaming stopped. The ship fell silent, except for the soft hiss of the emergency systems trying to restore power. Catherine waited. Beside her, she could hear Linda breathing fast. On the other side, Patty was saying something under her breath, maybe a prayer. Footsteps, slow and steady, coming down the corridor toward the cells. A figure emerged from the shadows. He was covered in blood, blue Thessaran blood and gray Rathani blood, none of it his own. In his hand, he held a knife that seemed to absorb the red emergency light rather than reflect it. Catherine recognized him immediately. She had not seen him in 20 years. It's not since she was a young lieutenant, and he was the instructor who had taught her things that were not in any official manual. He looked older now, his hair grayer, but those pale eyes were exactly the same. "Admiral Morrison," Marcus Cole said. His voice was calm, conversational, as if they had met at a dinner party rather than in a blood-soaked prison ship. "General Vasquez, Vice Admiral O'Brien, I'm here to take you home." Cole, Catherine breathed. "They actually woke you. They tortured you." He moved to her cell and pressed something against the lock. The metal dissolved like ice in sunlight. That was a mistake. He freed each of them in turn, dissolving the locks with some device Catherine did not recognize. When they were all standing in the corridor, he handed them weapons taken from the fallen guards. "How many crew on this ship?" Linda asked, checking her weapon with practiced efficiency. There were 47. Marcus's expression did not change. "Now there are 0. Patty crossed herself. She had seen combat on a dozen worlds, but even she looked pale. Mother of God. The ship's communication system crackled to life. A voice spoke Thessaron, trembling with barely controlled fear. "This is High Arbiter Zathan, broadcasting on all frequencies. We are aware of the situation aboard the vessel of justice. We demand the immediate surrender of the human infiltrator and the return of our prisoners. This act of aggression will not be tolerated." Marcus walked to a control panel and activated the ship's transmitter. "Hi, Arbiter. My name is Marcus Cole. I represent the United Earth government. You have committed an act of war against the Galactic Council." "No." Marcus's voice was quiet. "You committed an act of war against humanity, and you illegally detained and planned to torture 3 of our military officers. This is your one and only warning." "Warning?" Zathan's voice rose with outrage. "You dare to threaten the Council? We have fleets that could destroy your entire species. You could try." Akus was not boasting. He was simply stating a fact. "But let me tell you what's going to happen instead. In approximately 6 hours, the combined human fleet will arrive at the Sara Prime. Not to attack. To deliver a message." "What message?" "That we are done being afraid of you." Catherine watched Marcus as he spoke. She had seen him in action 20 years ago, watched him do things that seemed impossible. But she had never heard him speak like this, with such quiet certainty. "Every species in the galaxy is going to see what happens when you touch our people," Marcus continued. The council couldn't find me for 15 years while I was asleep in a box under a desert. You couldn't stop 3 human generals from liberating a planet. You couldn't protect this transport ship from one man with a knife. What does that tell you about your power? Zothan was silent. We're humanity, Marcus said. We came from a world that tried to kill us every day for 200,000 years. We survived ice ages and plagues and wars and the death of our own sun. We crawled out of caves and reached for the stars, and we did it without your help, without your guidance, without your permission. He leaned closer to the transmitter. We're not your subjects. We are not your students. We are not your pets. We are your equals. And if you ever touch our people again, you will learn just how much we have been holding back. He switched off the transmitter. Catherine looked at him. Was any of that true? About the fleet coming to the Sara Prime? Every word. Marcus allowed himself a small smile. Secretary General Coleman doesn't do things by half measures. 3 weeks later, the Galactic Council formally apologized to the United Earth government. The convictions were overturned. The facility on Tarthos 7 was shut down, and its existence publicly acknowledged for the first time. Ambassador Krethvalum was found dead in his quarters. The official cause was natural causes. No one believed it. No one asked questions. High Arbiter Zathan retired from public life. His successor was much more careful about how she dealt with humanity. Catherine Morrison, Linda Vasquez, and Patricia O'Brien returned to Earth as heroes. They were given new commands, new responsibilities, new opportunities to serve. And Marcus Cole, he went back to sleep. Humanity hoped they would never need to wake him again. But they knew that if anyone ever dared to threaten their people, the Baba Yaga would be waiting in the darkness. Some monsters are nightmares. Some monsters are protectors. And some monsters are both. The galaxy had learned an important lesson. Humanity was kind. Humanity was patient. Humanity was willing to follow rules and make compromises and live in peace. But humanity was also the species that had created the Baba Yaga. And that meant there were some lines that should never, ever be crossed. The end.